post-colonialism colonialism as we know طبعا الميجور أو figures فيها إدوارد سعيد، هومي بابا، جات سبيفيك. They try to critique the cultural representations of colonialism through the lens of literary and cultural studies. يعني in the literature they try to criticize the ideology of colonialism. On the other hand, بقى decoloniality. Decoloniality focuses on the ongoing power structures rooted in colonial encounter, especially in power structures like what? Like the coloniality of power, the matrix of power, the privileges that favors Western ways of knowing, being, seeing the world, while marginalizing, avoiding, disqualifying others. Others دي بقى, or the other means what? Means مثلا third world people, women, native countries, and so on. Right. In my studies, I tried to focus on different genres like novel, memoir, poetry, and I also focused on specific geopolitical contexts. Places like مثلا Afghanistan, subaltern or native indigenous places. فاحنا we have بقى Afghanistan, Syria, South Africa, Ireland, and Palestine. Okay? These genres and political contexts collectively build a coherent argument, and I try to build an argument about how literature functions as a tool for liberation and critique. يعني how writers and poets try to criticize post-colonial legacies. So I started by defining the tenets of decolonial elements of decoloniality in their works, and examined how individuals, especially women and communities, how they are oppressed by colonial, imperial, patriarchal systems. Okay? طيب لو احنا خدنا مجموعة كده من narratives and poetry and we focused and examined them, هنلاقي certain common thematic connections in these narratives. The authors and poets try to do what? They try to raise certain issues. Issues مثلا number one, the critique of dominant power structures from the perspective of the insider and outsider, من جوه ومن بره الكانتري, how they look at colonial structures. Okay? Like number two, برضو authors are try to examine the body, especially the female bodies, okay, and lands. Okay? But why body and lands? Because they are sites of violence, struggle, resistance, and memory. Number three, writers and poets also use their own writings, the texts themselves, the narratives, novels, memoir, poetry, as political and therapeutic act of resistance. Okay, and I'm going to tell you how. Number four, authors also try to differentiate between or to present the tension between reconciliation, acceptance, agreement with the other, with the colonizer maybe, and refusal of colonialism and its legacies. Okay? Right. Main techniques authors and writers, poets use in tackling decoloniality or a decolonial approach. The main technique they use narrative and storytelling. تمام؟ through storytelling and narrative they challenge dominant narratives. وoften الdominant narratives دي بتكون Western colonial patriarchal narratives. Okay, and we use poetic resistance. Poetic resistance means the language of literature, how they use through poetry, for example, how they can resist such colonial or patriarchal legacies. Oh, again, number two, through narrative and storytelling, the authors articulate the experiences and identities of the oppressed, the colonized, the marginalized, but on their own terms. يعني باستخدام language of the oppressed, of the colonized. Number three, authors برضو through narrative and storytelling provide collective trauma. What does it mean, trauma? Trauma creates lasting cycles of violence. Trauma could be psychological trauma, physical trauma, and these kinds of trauma create lasting cycles of violence, displacement, and identity crisis. The authors برضو through narrative and storytelling or through a decolonial approach, they imagine futures of justice and liberation. Okay, so this is introduction about what does it mean, decoloniality, the tenets of decoloniality, and the main thematic structure or connections between authors. Now we have, let's examine a few decolonial narratives. Let's start with my first study. I focused on two novels, not novels, one novel and one memoir. The first novel by Susan Staples, American writer, and her novel is, the title is Under the Persimmon Tree. Staples wrote this novel from a Western perspective. She talked about Afghanistan and Afghan people, especially women. While the other narrative is Summer Yazbek's The Crossing. The memoir she wrote, Yazbek wrote a memoir. The title of her memoir is The Crossing. And she wrote this memoir from an indigenous perspective. She talked about Syria and Syrian people, again, especially women. Although the characters face double colonization, double colonization from what? Characters are oppressed by both foreign imperial power, American forces, and imperial power, and local patriarchal structure. Again, Syrian men impose certain oppression or female women. So we have double colonization here. And the authors, both Staples and Yazbek, represent their characters from fundamentally different perspectives and counter narrative. We have the Western perspective, white savior complex, and we have the indigenous insider viewpoint. For example, Staples in her novel presented the stereotypical Afghan women. This means what? A stereotypical character. It means helpless, silent, victimized character. Okay? And we have American citizen in the same novel as a savior, an educated woman, reinforcing the binary of the enlightened West and the backward East. On the other hand, we have Yazbek, who presents herself as the main hero, who is powerful, who has a voice, who try to change the circumstances in Syria. From another angle, if we look at the point of the body or the female body in conflict zones like Afghanistan and Syria during revolution or crisis, okay? The female body بقى serves as a site of patriarchal control and violence. But at the same time, the same female body works as a site of resilience and agency. Okay? For example, the main character, Najma, faces hardship in her journey from Afghanistan to Pakistan, and Yazbek herself, her crossings into Syria 3 times, and the hardships she faces while moving in and out. Okay, her body, of course, is affected. But we have different perspectives. While Stables introduces a stereotyped Western narrative about third world women, Yazbek's memoir serves as a decolonizing political act. Not only a political act, but also it creates a historical record. A memoir creates a historical record, and it becomes a form of resistance against silencing the marginalized women. Let's move to the second study. My second study, for example, is on different area or different areas. We have the poetry of Michael Longley. And Michael Longley, he's an Irish poet. He wrote about the Irish troubles in the partitioned Ireland. And on the other hand, we have Murid al-Barghouti, a Palestinian, the famous Palestinian poet. He wrote about exile and displacement, about the colonized Palestine. But there is a difference between Longley talking about Ireland, the partitioned Ireland, and the colonized land described by al-Barghouti. While Longley's poetry, which is about the years of Irish troubles that started from late 60s until the late 90s, his poetry seeks peace and reconciliation. Reconciliation means agreement with the other. Because Ireland was divided into Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, and Irish people, by the end of these crises and riots, they accepted a hybrid identity. Okay, but the angle of acceptance comes from an insider partitioned people. Yani people are the land itself, the state itself is partitioned after the announcement of a peace treaty between the British and the Irish Republic Army, or IRA. On the other hand, we have al-Barghouti, Murid al-Barghouti. His exilic perspective rejects the legitimacy of the colonial partition. He absolutely refuses the legacies of colonialism, offering a resistance narrative from the outside. So we have two different narratives here. The poet of the Longley accepts reconciliation with the other, while al-Barghouti refuses reconciliation. But again, while Ireland's conflict, the conflict inside Ireland is largely internal and sectarian. Sectarian means what bad? It was between Catholic and Protestant, but within a bordered state. We have a bordered state here in Ireland, and we have internal conflicts. Okay? Right. And we have the struggle is over a physical territory. So the poetry documents the trauma inscribed on both the land and people. So we have here a trauma, but we have again different kind of trauma. In Ireland, they get along with their own trauma and recovered quickly. But in Palestine, they still have psychological physical trauma until now. And مريد البرغوثي for example in one of his collections من ضمن دواوينه وديوان is called Midnight الليل قصائد الليل وقصائد أخرى. ده اسم الديوان. So he says what it's lines from his poetry. I must have a day that calls me by my name. I must have a home that is not this page. And he's questioning, why then does a respected gentleman from Westminster say that I made no contribution to this world? I will not send a spaceship to discover life on planet Mars. I will try to discover life here on this earth. And he's talking about his land, Palestine. These lines paint a picture of al-Barghouti's exilic perspective as one of resistance, rejection حتى of imposed political situation, and insistence of his people's right and to have their own land and to have their own identities. Okay? But here we have two different, again, perspectives. While al-Barghouti's poetry serves as a weapon to assert existence, Longley's poetry functions as a tool for peacemaking and reconciliation. Okay, are you following until now or what?
We're quite fine. I'm following your points, and we're fine. If you want to continue, it's fine. If you want to open some discussion, because it seems very too, I would say, very academic. Like, I hope everyone here has read Decoloniality and applied it somewhere. So otherwise, it's a very long story.
Yes, but try to summarize everything in my own way.
Can you just summarize that in like 5 minutes? Like, what lessons do we learn from this new theory of decoloniality? I would say new to us, and like, but it has been going on for in Australia and other places where people argued for Aborigines knowing and being that is different from Western ways of thinking and being. So, what would you recommend to us?
Okay, let's leave the results of the coloniality until the end of the workshop.
Okay.
And let me first continue this part, and then I'll end with your questions.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. In my third study back, I worked on or analyzed, examined the poetry of Malika Nadalbo's poetry. Malika Nadalbo is from South Africa, and in her poetry, she addresses the aftermath of apartheid and colonial violence in South Africa. So her poetry she centers marginalized indigenous subaltern knowledge to critique the dominant systems of Western capitalism, colonialism, and patriarchy. In one of her poems called "This Morning is New," beyond the browning bandages around forgotten lamps and forgettable stab wounds, beyond the lootings and shootings, corruption, exclusion, toxic erosion, densification, gentrification, erasure. I know if she uses very powerful, tough words to express her refusal of Western capitalism and colonialism. These lines criticize the capitalist colonial structure that continue urban decay and environmental destruction and the systemic oppression of marginalized communities. Okay. Again, there is Another important point in Nadalva's poetry, which is the exploitation of Black indigenous women's bodies. Again, we return to the clash between, or not the clash, the representation. So the exploitation of Black indigenous women's bodies reflects the exploitation of the land environment under the capitalist patriarchy. Again, or Western capitalism. So the female body is also a site of historical. It is also the female bodies. Her poetry is also sites of historical trauma, resistance, and reclaimed identity. So her poetry, Nadalva's poetry, about South African people and South Africa in general, serves as a decolonial tool for transformative change, giving voice to the silenced, marginalized, oppressed, while helping to reclaim knowledge. Okay, so reclaiming knowledge is one important aspect of decoloniality. Is to spread knowledge. Is to help people to be educated and aware of what's going on with them. Okay, so in my conclusion, finally I reached that conclusion. Okay, in my conclusion, I try to collect everything in all these literary works, سواء بقى كانوا poetry, novel, or memoir. They assert or